everyone. Welcome to Radiant Living, Inspiring Humanity to Thrive. I'm your host, Marisa B. Today I have with me former state senator from New York for 9 terms, now senior advisor to the mayor. Someone's dedicated her entire professional career toward improving the lives of working families. No stranger to hard work, activism, the government structure, working for the people and by the people. She was an active member of her local labor union, quickly rising to the ranks of vice president for political action and legislative affairs, authoring numerous laws protecting hardworking New Yorkers, like Domestic Workers' Bill of Rights, New York Secure Choice Act, Prompt Pay Bill, Wage Theft Prevention Act, the New York State Commercial Goods Transportation Industry Fair Play Act, and she championed the Compassionate Care Act. Through the legislative process, despite opposition and campaigning that had a lot of misrepresentation, the act allows New Yorkers that are ill that can use medical marijuana, if I'm not mistaken. Today, I'd like to welcome Senator Diane J. Savino. Boy, that was a lot of things to say, and that was only just the tip of the iceberg, wasn't it? Thank you for coming today.
You're welcome, Marisa. Thank you for inviting me. 18 years in the legislature is a lot of activity, and you try and encapsulate your work in just a brief biography. But I think you hit some of my high points. But in 2014, actually, I would say 2013, I took on the issue of medical cannabis. At the time, there were 22 other states that had adopted medical cannabis laws in various forms, or they were in the process of either doing it through public. Actually, in almost every single one of them had done it by public referendum. New York State is not an initiative and referendum state. We are what they call a representative democracy. So people elect, their senators, their assembly members, they send them to Albany to enact legislation that's or constitutional amendments. Constitutional amendments go on the ballot. But in terms of things like, changing the laws to allow for the sale and the production and usage of medical marijuana, that had to be decided by the legislature. I picked up the bill from a previous colleague, Senator Tom Duane, who carried it for a couple of years. I was a co-sponsor, but he retired, and he knew my interest in the issue, and he asked me when he was leaving if I would take up the issue. And I immediately said yes, for a bunch of reasons. One, I had seen people in my own family suffer from severe and chronic pain, either because they were terminally ill or they just had a condition that they were forced to manage with opioids. At the same time, we were in the middle of the beginning of the opioid abuse crisis. We were seeing the effects of rampant overprescriptions of opioids, where many people were being forced to become reliant on them because they had whatever the issue was, whether it was a terminal condition or whether they had an injury, or if they couldn't afford physical therapy. There was a whole bunch of reasons that Americans were becoming increasingly reliant on opioids, not to mention the fact that the pharmaceutical companies were selling it as if it was, the answer to everybody's prayers. And we have now seen, almost a decade later, the results. So I took on the bill, and I decided that if I was going to do this, I wanted to see what had occurred in the other states that have already adopted it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Because when you create public policy, you want to see what's worked in other places. And that included Canada. So I actually got on a plane and I went to Colorado, and I met with the regulators in Colorado and some of the medical marijuana companies. Colorado was in an interesting place at that time. This was late 2013, and they were about almost 20 years into the medical marijuana arena. But that had been done by, as I said, a public referendum. But their market was a bit of a mess. They had local opt-outs where local counties could say, we don't want marijuana. Other ones said, we do want it. So you had like marijuana deserts, and you had other areas that became oversaturated with it. So the legislature at that point, tried to fix it. So there was a legislative a referendum that year to not only correct the medical program, but allow for the adult use program to be created. So they were in two different places. But it was an interesting experience and an eye-opening one. So it gave me the opportunity to see the industry up close and personal. I learned a lot of interesting things in Colorado, and what happens when you have a product that you're trying to regulate at the state level, but that the federal government says is illegal. So you're trying to create a law for like the four corners of your state. So if you can imagine the medical companies and even the adult use companies, they are required by law in every state that has this now to collect a significant amount of tax revenue and relay it to the tax collectors in that state, however it's done. Well, most banks will not service this industry. So how do you transmit the tax that you've collected to the tax collector?
Right.
Well, in Colorado at the time, they were doing it in cash. At the same time, the regulations on how you have to secure the marijuana that you built, that you've grown, that you've cultivated, that you have processed, that you're about to sell, you have to keep it in a vault. Well, they would keep the cash and the product in the same vault. If you've never been in a grow house, and it was all grown indoors, if you've never been in a grow house, it stinks to the high heavens. It's an incredibly overpowering smell. So the money and the marijuana smell the same.
Wow.
So they would deliver bags of cash to the Colorado Bureau of Tax and Finance in these bags full of stinking cash.
Oh my gosh.
And so these were the kind of ridiculous regulations and restrictions that are placed on the cannabis industry across the country, whether it be Colorado or California. I went to California. California is probably the worst example because California didn't legalize cannabis. They allowed localities to do it. And so you had some counties said yes, some counties said no. And then after almost 20 years of just chaos, the state tried to regulate it. And now you have just a mess. Oregon decided that they would move forward. And they issued so many licenses that at one point they were up to 2,700 licenses. There was so much legal marijuana being grown that it tanked the market. And so you had legislators who said, well, not only will we create a legal regulated market, but we'll be able to derive a significant amount of tax revenue from the sale of it. Well, when the price drops and the tax rate is tied to the price, you don't get anything. So it's been a mess across the country.
But this is all statewide, correct? This is not, the federal
state.
Government has not, in the United States, the federal government has not enacted a law.
Right. And marijuana is classified as a Schedule I drug. What that means is it is the most dangerous, according to the FDA and the federal government, marijuana is as dangerous as LSD and heroin. That's what a Schedule I is.
Wow.
Opioids, which have killed millions of people.
Yes.
I think the only thing that's killed more people in terms of a drug is nicotine, or tobacco. But opioids are a Schedule II, which means anyone can prescribe, anyone who is licensed to prescribe antibiotics can prescribe opioids. Think about that. And let that sit in your head for a while. Yeah. So the federal government, all this time, as I said, in 2014, we were the 23rd state to legalize cannabis for medicinal uses. And I'll get to that story in a minute, how complicated that was. But now I think we're up to almost 41 states.
Okay.
There are 435 members of Congress. 375 of them represent states that have a legal cannabis market, whether medical or adult use or both. If you were to poll the members of Congress and ask them if they would vote to legalize cannabis, they will tell you no. Now, this is, to me, because I've been to Washington several times to lobby them on this, it is the most startling example of cognitive dissonance that I have ever come across among elected officials. They represent states that have legal cannabis in their own state, adopted by their legislature, or more likely by their voters through public referendum.
Right.
So the voters have already said, yes, we want it. We want medical, we want adult use, we want a legal regulated market. But they will do nothing in Congress to fix this problem. So now we are on track to have a 50-state marketplace with 50 different sets of rules and regulations for patients, for growers, for cultivators, for operators, for delivery people, for transporters, and a banking industry that continues to refuse to touch it because the federal government says that this is illegal money. If you are in the industry, or think about this, you're a small business owner. And many of the people who are in this business are small business owners, the dispensaries, the cultivators, the processors. If everything that you normally do, I think your husband's an accountant, right? So
yes.
So if you ask your husband, everything that a small business is able to write off on their federal taxes associated with the investment in their business or losses, you cannot do on your federal tax return because the federal government considers this illegal.
Right.
The rules that you are required to abide by in order to participate and get a license, and I don't care which state it is, are so strict, so difficult that it makes it almost impossible for people to stay in this business and make a profit. After a while, they wind up giving up, and then their licenses are usually bought up by these multi-state companies, which is a real concern for a lot of people who've invested years in trying to create a legal regulated market where they want to see, particularly people who have been disproportionately harmed by the war on drugs, have the opportunity to finally earn a legal living, in the cannabis industry. So unless and until the federal government finally realizes that what they're doing makes no sense, this industry is going to go through fits and starts. From my perspective, I was never really interested in the adult use. From a social justice perspective, it didn't seem to me to make any sense that we should continue to keep this as an illegal thing. I was more involved in as you know, in the medical cannabis. But for patients, these stupid restrictions and this inconsistency and application of the laws make it really hard for patients because it's considered illegal by the federal government, insurance companies will not pay for it. So if you're a patient and you suffer from chronic pain associated with, pick whatever it happens to be, and you have insurance that will pay for opioids, and your copay is $3, but you would prefer to use, cannabis because you don't want to become addicted to these dangerous drugs, but you have to pay $300 a month. What are you going to do? You're going to use the opioids because you can't afford it. Most people don't have that, disposable
where would
cash.
they get it from? Right. Exactly.
So, one of the changes to the law that I tried to get done before I left the Senate was to require insurance companies to cover cannabis because it's legal in the state of New York. The insurance industry has fought it, as they fought it in every state. This can only be solved by Congress acting. If you're a doctor and you want to treat your patients, and think about this, I'm gonna go away. I'm leaving, town. I'm going on vacation. I want to be able to take my medication with me because I need it.
Right.
I can't go to the airport and take it with me.
Yes. Exactly.
And if I go to
laws.
California, I can't go into a legal dispensary in California and purchase medical cannabis. I could probably go to buy adult use, to an adult use dispensary, but medical cannabis and adult use cannabis are not the same. There are different strains that work better for people with the particular conditions. We know that for people who suffer from refractory epilepsy, there's a certain oil-based cannabis that they use. Like you can't just walk in and buy that. So what happens with a lot of patients is they give up after a while.
Right.
They return to the really dangerous opioids that are easy to get, cheap for them, and the relief that they're seeking is denied to them. People who the people who suffer from PTSD the most, veterans, they have the hardest time because if you're a veteran and you are serviced by the Veterans Administration, they will not allow you to use medical cannabis. Doesn't matter that there's studies, done all over the world to show the improvement in their symptoms. They don't care. If it hasn't been done in the United States, as you know, it doesn't exist, right? So that's the attitude of the FDA. Their continued refusal to reschedule marijuana also prevents any real research being done in the United States, which is a real problem. So we see it happening. Canadians are light years ahead of us with respect to research. The Israelis, decades in front of us with respect to research. The Netherlands. So other countries are ahead of us on this. They know they have the evidence to show that medical cannabis can work for a whole host of conditions. And we continue to say, no, it's a dangerous drug and it shouldn't be allowed. And we allow states to do it. And now we're on the verge of having 50 different marketplaces, which makes no sense.
But
it's
we have
incredibly
also
frustrating.
We also don't have, every state has a different law. And so not every state has the adult use either.
Right.
I believe, and I could be mistaken, but I believe, for example, we're in New York. I'm in New York. I think I'm sandwiched in a state in between states that actually allow that. But I mean,
But we have adult use in New York now too. It's
We
just
do.
we totally screwed up this program.
right, but
Because
like John Q. Public, especially people that prefer to stay away from the pharmaceuticals, they want to
Mhm.
grow something they can't grow. They can't grow marijuana on their property to make a salve or an oil or an ointment because it's illegal. At least in New York, it's illegal. And I'm not sure. I know Canada, you can do that, but I don't know if you could do it anywhere in the United States.
Not yet. So, well, there's some states that allow home grow. Medical patients in New York State are now allowed to grow. I don't know how many of them are actually doing it.
Right.
I was never a big fan of the idea of home grow because I think if you're going to have a legal regulated market, home grow makes it very hard to regulate that, for want of a better word.
I
Because
also
you need
understand that it's difficult to grow. It's not
right.
something
It's
that's
not
easy.
easy, right?
Right.
It's not like growing a house plant, but you
Right.
know there are people who can do it. The Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, which was passed in 2021, which is allowed for adult use in the state of New York and the further development of the hemp industry. And we made some changes to the medical program there to improve upon it. It allowed for the medical patients to be able to home grow after a certain period of time and up to, I think, 6 plants. And then after 18 months after the opening of the first legal dispensaries, they're supposed to issue regulations on home grow for other people. Problem with that is we have very few inspectors through the Office of Cannabis Management, which has oversight over the cannabis program. And I don't know how you would be able to stop people who might be growing, large amounts. Six plants sounds easy, but what happens when you have 600 plants?
Right.
Right. And it can be very dangerous. People would grow it indoors. It's a tremendous fire hazard. You need a lot of electricity. You need a lot of water and a lot of light.
Yes.
But it's hard to regulate and police. So I have my own concerns about home grow. But you're right. We have, again, in Massachusetts you can do it. In Connecticut you can do it. In New York you can't do it. And every state has different rules. And this is why the federal government really needs to act.
Sure, because you would want to have one rule. I mean, I know if I remember my history, American history correctly, federal governments can enact a law and the states can actually make it more stringent, but they can't change it. So the federal government really has the control over making a uniform law throughout the country.
The federal government can preempt the state if they choose to, but through an act of Congress. Congress's refusal to do anything has led to this patchwork system that we have. The other concern that you have is that up until now, the Justice Department has decided not to pursue cases against states that have legal regulated, or have legal regulated markets that have been adopted through either an act of the legislature or public referendum. But they don't have to do that. They could turn around tomorrow and raid every state.
Right.
And so that's a serious concern that we have. During the Obama administration, the head of the Justice Department then, Mr. Cole, sent out a memo that was widely accepted and used around the country by states that had legal marijuana programs, whether they were medical or adult use or both. It's called the Cole Amendment, and it spelled out what they would and wouldn't do. And when Donald Trump became president, he rescinded the Cole Amendment. Now, they did not pursue any cases unless it was rampant abuse of the law where you saw illegal operators. They can pursue illegal operators, but nothing has replaced the Cole Amendment. And so everybody still kind of looks over their shoulder if at any moment in time, could the federal government, could a crusading U.S. attorney decide that he wants to come in and shut down an operation? They would be perfectly within their legal rights to do so. It hasn't happened, but this is why the Congress really needs to act. When you have 40 plus states that have passed laws or adopted public referendum, it's time for them to reschedule marijuana. I know Senator Gillibrand, who is the junior senator from New York State, she's aggressively pursuing this now, to reschedule it. Stop, allow this marketplace to stabilize, where we could have interstate commerce, where, when you think about it, not that I'm a big fan of tobacco. I think we should probably outlaw tobacco, but right now, where do we grow tobacco in the United States?
Don't we still grow it in the South?
Yeah. tobacco is grown basically in Virginia and the
Oh,
Carolinas. And that's kind of it. And it's produced and it's sold all around the country.
right.
We don't grow tobacco in 50 states. We don't make bourbon in 50 states,
Mm.
right? You allow a market to mature so that
Mhm.
maybe California is the best place to grow cannabis. I don't know.
Mhm.
Maybe, you have you might have the best producers or the best distributors come. Like the market should be able to mature and grow
Mhm.
and be able to service the country without us having, we have so much legal marijuana that most of the time it winds up being thrown away.
Oh, wow.
It goes bad. Marijuana's a plant.
Yes, yes.
You harvest it and it sits in these warehouses trying to find its marketplace because we're still competing with the illicit marketplace, which is
Wow.
running rampant.
Yes. Yes. Now, does every state have the same law? Like
No,
everyone who
they have their own
grows
version.
marijuana has to have a license, right? In
Oh
every
yeah,
state or
yeah.
no?
They have their own licensing scheme depending on whatever,
Okay.
it could be even more stringent. Of the states that I have visited, I was most impressed with Las Vegas, with Nevada, because Nevada understands regulation because of the casino industry.
Gambling, yes, of course.
Right. So they, in my opinion, others might disagree with me, but I think Nevada has it, has done it the best out of
Mhm.
every state I've visited.
And what did they do different?
They figured out again, I think they built it off of the idea of the same way the casino industry is regulated,
Mhm.
right? So you have a state board, you have these commissioners, and it's
Mhm.
very tightly controlled. You don't see the proliferation of illegal pot shops all over the place.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, we
Mhm.
have that in New York. It's a disaster. They're on every corner, they've managed to recognize that people want it,
Mhm.
and you have to make the locations attractive, but
Mhm.
you also have to make sure that you're consistent with federal law. It can't be near a school, it can't be near a church,
Right.
but it doesn't have to be, these ridiculous rules. So New York State is similar to some other states where a legal cannabis dispensary cannot have attractive signage,
Right.
it cannot have advertisements in the window. It
Mhm.
can't sell edibles that look attractive. I mean, it's just dumb. But you can go down the
Mhm.
street to an illicit smoke shop. And now if you're a
And they
regular
have it all.
consumer, right, how do you know? You don't know what's legal and what's not legal. You just,
Right.
New Yorkers know, well, cannabis is legal in New York State now. And they see all of these places that are selling stuff and they have flashing neon
Uh-huh.
lights and they think it's legal. Well, that's not legal. That product, we don't know where it came from. It hasn't been tested by, a laboratory. We have no
Right.
idea about consumer consumption, but if you're a member of the general public, you don't know that. But in Las Vegas, they've made it attractive. It's a welcoming environment.
Mhm.
And, partly because, everything in what Las Vegas is like that. But they
Right.
recognize people want to experience this. So let's let's put in place tight rules and regulations to make sure you don't have leakage into the illicit marketplace.
Mhm.
You want to make sure that the regulators are able to have access to the place to make sure organized crime stays out, because obviously organized crime is a problem in some parts of the country. Certainly not New York, right? But they understand regulation, and they've done it, in my opinion, the best out of the states that I
Mhm.
visited.
And so now, so for example, for New York, they have issued certain licenses to growers, correct?
Mhm. You have growers licenses. Well, so when the medical program was first adopted, it was what's called a vertically integrated license, which means you had to grow it, process it, distribute it, sell it, everything under
Did
one
the whole
license.
thing. Oh, okay.
The whole thing, all under one license, which is very complicated and very expensive.
I was
And
gonna
there
say,
was a
how
lot of
much
criticism.
processing? Where would you do it all, right?
Yeah,
You're growing, you're
yeah,
processing. That's a
right.
lot. You're storing.
Yes, everything. And so there was a lot of concern that the bar was too high for MWBEs to get into the business, because in
Mhm.
order to do that, you have to have a lot of liquidity and a lot of money.
Yes.
And so it was very complicated. Then, so when the adult use law was passed, vertical integration was specifically banned under that bill. So we wanted to create multiple entry points into the marketplace for people. So you can be a grower, you can be a distributor, you can be a processor, you can be you can have sometimes you can have multiple licenses too. You can be a dispensary, you can be a boutique. There's a cooperative license. There's entry points in for people who are, artisans in the cannabis industry, which all sounds great. Problem with the New York State law is they drag their feet in establishing the license structure and issuing licenses to people, because one of the foundations of the law, and this was important, was that we wanted to grant licenses to people who had been disproportionately affected by cannabis convictions in the past, what they call social equity applicants, which is important. You want to be able to do that. However, the state, totally screwed up the process, and it dragged out the initial licenses to, 2 years after the law was adopted. And when they did that, they allowed the illicit marketplace to just walk right in. And so again, the general public hears legal cannabis, and, the cartels are smart. They read the law. They actually have lawyers, and they figured out, well, if we open up shop, who's going to stop us? And they did. So we now have in New York City alone, about 2,000 to 2,200 illegal cannabis shops.
Wow.
It's almost impossible to shut them down because all of the regulation lies in the state. So local governments can't just close them down. So people say to mayor of the city of New York, or the mayor of Rochester, or county executive of Dutchess, what are you doing? What's going on?
Clean this up. Yeah.
And the local governments don't have the power to do this. So we're seeking some changes to the law right now that would grant some of the authority to local governments to at least padlock these locations. And these people are smart. Criminals are smart. They read the law. So they saw, well, if we open a store and we sell cannabis alongside potato chips and Diet Coke and candy, and they come in and they raid us, and they seize all the cannabis product, and they hit us with a fine. The fines are the cost of doing business for these guys.
Right.
They close us down totally because we also have
other things. Yeah.
Selling legal products. And that's how, judges they have to read the statute as it's written.
Right.
So you can't close them down totally. So guess what? They reopen 2 days later, and they're back to selling illegal weed in no time. Yeah. So it's a real problem. And the state, I warned them of this when the bill was in the drafting phase, but, as I like to say, nobody likes to listen. I think one of the biggest problems for the people who were the main framers of this section of the law on the adult use is they did not do what I did, which is go to other states and meet with people
and look around. Yes.
See what went wrong and try not to replicate it. But, you live and learn.
Now, what about hemp? Because in New York, that was also a big issue.
Yeah, hemp is legal. Hemp is legal.
Right, but you still need a license to do that.
Yes, you do. You need a license for hemp. There's more. The hemp growers are looking to expand into the cannabis growers, but most hemp is grown outdoors. You could smoke. There's a lot of concern in the beginning about hemp, but you could smoke a whole field of hemp. You're not going to get high.
Right.
Hemp is
it's different. Yes.
Right. The main purpose for hemp really is for industrial purposes. Hemp can be used for all sorts of things, clothing and furniture. And quite honestly, I've seen, in my opinion, the best use for hemp is for construction purposes. It is almost permeable to salt water. So we have all these areas in the state that are, homes have been destroyed when you have hurricanes or, flooding from the beach. That's what we should be using for construction purposes. I actually saw BMW built a car made out of hemp.
Oh, wow.
It was on display at a convention. I don't know whether it was in Las Vegas or might have been at the Javits Center. It's amazing what you can do with hemp. And the fact that people don't use more is I think, kind of shocking. But I think people just don't realize all the uses for hemp.
Yeah, no, I did know that there were a lot of uses for it, that it was really pretty much a fantastic plant to grow. But I knew that you needed a license. And I think that a lot of people, I'm not interested in growing marijuana as a business. So I don't know all of the laws. I don't know the difference between a medical dispensary and now walking into a shop that might sell. And as you said, there could be illegal ones too that are selling it alongside of candy, cigarettes, potato chips. I just don't know.
Well, that should be your first clue. If you walk in, if they're selling anything other than cannabis, it's illegal.
Right. Because
if you have a license to sell, if you have a retail license in New York State, you can only sell cannabis products. You cannot sell anything else.
Right. Okay.
So there could be multiple kinds of cannabis products, and those
Right, but
products
that's
have
all.
to have been produced in the state of New York from cannabis grown in the state of New York.
Right.
And it has to have been inspected, and it has to have been tested in a laboratory that's licensed to do that testing in the state of New York. So it's all got to
Wow.
be New York State product. So if you walk in the door and you see anything other than cannabis
Mhm.
products, it's illegal.
It's illegal. And then, that's a lot to have to do then if it has to be grown in New York, inspected. So I'm assuming that there are inspectors now that go to these
Mhm.
facilities that grow and the ones that
Yes.
sell. I mean, you have to have people working to do that job to
Mhm.
oversee that.
Yes. Unfortunately, the state doesn't have enough inspectors, but the ramifications for, the license holders is pretty dire. If you violate the terms of your license, that's it. You only get one shot.
Mhm.
So the industry is pretty good at policing itself, the legal industry.
Mhm.
It's just the challenges are really difficult, and the costs associated with it are so high.
Now, but the medical dispensary is different than a shop that sells it legally.
Right. Medical dispense, yeah,
Or are they
they
going
look
together now?
well, so the medical companies, there's 10 of them in the state, and they have 40 dispensaries for medical, but they're allowed to deliver to now. They're of their 40, half of them will be able to co-locate with an adult use. So they'll be able to do medical and adult use.
Oh, they can, but they can't advertise.
No, God forbid,
So
you
how
know.
would anybody know where it is? I mean, I understand if it's probably medically necessary, maybe your doctor would even tell you where you're going to get that filled,
Mhm.
but how do you know where it is
Good
other
question.
than medical?
It's a good question. One for the regulators, why they seem to think it's so important, um, that there not be signage or that it be unattractive. I never could figure out.
And my gosh, people just like, you only want a cream for a pain.
Mhm.
Like, honestly,
Right.
I have a
Yeah.
backache. I want cream for the pain, and I don't care
Mhm.
what's in it. And I certainly don't want opioids. I don't want anything. Well, first of all, I don't want any chemicals. That's the first
Mhm.
thing. I certainly don't want anything that's going to make me addicted to it. But if you're having a severe pain, it's not going away. You want some kind of cream, some kind of ointment or oil. You can't get it. You don't even know where you're going to get it from.
Mhm.
That's the
Well, I
question.
mean, if you're a New York State resident and you want to become a medical marijuana patient, I mean, you could obviously you can go online to the Office of Cannabis Management,
Right.
and there's a whole page just on medical cannabis, and you can find out all the answers to those questions. It can refer you to a doctor that will, help you get a registration. That was another thing. There was for a while there was a lot of doctors who were, charging
Fearful,
patients
right? Or
cash.
fearful.
No, no. Well, we had
Okay.
that, and then you had other doctors
Yeah.
who figured this was a new cottage industry. Well, I'll write your certification to become a medical cannabis patient and charge them $500. And
Wow.
so we cracked down on that because I'm sorry,
Oh my gosh.
there's no fee associated with this. You
Right.
know, if you're seeing a patient and they qualify and you make the referral, you don't get to charge them money.
Mhm.
It was really bad because again, these are patients who they're already paying out of pocket, or
Mhm.
they were self-medicating with marijuana they bought off the street. We're
Right.
not supposed to continue to victimize people who are just seeking relief from a chronic condition,
Right.
some of whom will have for the rest of their life.
And that I had not heard, which
Oh
is
yeah.
terrible, but I hadn't heard that. But I had heard from some of my clients quite the opposite, that a lot of the doctors were fearful to write the script. They didn't
Yeah.
want to get involved with any of that because they were
It
fearful
was
of the
difficult
law
in the
and how it
beginning.
affected them. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Right.
how it
The,
affected
the
them.
the medical society was opposed to this when I did the bill in 2014,
Hmm.
and the governor at the time, former Governor Cuomo, he was vehemently opposed to it.
Hmm.
He took the bill that I wrote, which was significantly more expansive,
Hmm.
and it, forced me to restrict a lot of it, and otherwise he wouldn't have signed it. One of his final conditions was, we restricted it to 26 conditions, in the
Hmm.
original bill, and over the years we added conditions to it. He was totally opposed to post-traumatic stress disorder. He didn't believe it. Uh, 2 years later, he changed his tune. Uh,
Hmm.
but he had one absolute line in the sand. He said, I will not sign a bill that allows you to smoke medical marijuana. But that's it. That was his line in the sand.
Hmm.
And so the assembly sponsor, former Assemblyman Dick Gottfried, who had carried a version of this bill for 25 years, Think about
Wow.
that. 25 years to carry the bill. And in a year and a half, I moved the bill in the Senate. Like you can never get an audience in the Senate. So, but he also like he would just carry the bill. It was like, okay, I'm going to do medical marijuana, but he never really put any effort into it, but any real effort. But in any event, this was the governor's line in the sand. I won't sign a bill. Uh, Over the next 5 years, and he made it such a narrow program, and he even included a requirement that if for any reason the things were going crazy, that he had the emergency authority to pull the plug on the law and cancel it.
Wow.
So that was 2014, July of 2014. 5 years later, he signed a bill that has created the environment where you have 2,800 illegal markets, illegal shops in the city of New York. You can smoke marijuana anywhere. You can legally smoke tobacco.
Right.
Think about that. Just in a few years, he went from, I absolutely will not sign a bill on medical cannabis to smoke it wherever you want, which is why if you walk around the city, particularly in New York City, and maybe not, not in the media, but if you probably went to
Oh no, you
Poughkeepsie,
can smell. Yeah, you can smell it all over.
people walking down the street smoking weed.
Yeah. Well, actually, I couldn't understand the stink. The stink was horrific,
Yeah,
and I
hate
just
smell it.
didn't. Well, I didn't even like the original one. Put it that way.
Yeah.
I didn't like the original one when we were younger. This was horrific, and I didn't I mean, I knew what it was, but I didn't understand why it was smelling like this. And I had to do my research because I couldn't understand what would possess someone to create this smelling like this. They say it's a different type of strain, whatever, but it is so potent. And yes, people walk all over the place smoking it.
Right. So
Now,
again,
are they doing it because they're ill? Who
listen,
am I to ask?
I don't have an issue with people. You want to smoke, smoke. It's not I just don't like the smell. I never like the smell.
Right.
But
Yeah.
again, I don't like the smell of cigarettes and I don't like the smell of
Right.
cigars. But again, we had the governor who went from one extreme
Right.
to the other. I'm surprised he didn't smoke a joint when he signed the bill, right? So it's just like, so we've created this environment now where it's just chaos and still the federal government pretends like if
will
they were
not
to
get
legalize,
involved.
oh my God, everybody would start smoking. But they're doing it anyway.
Right. Right.
It's very frustrating.
Well, I'm wondering why. I mean, I can understand that people have a personal belief, a personal conviction, but then I also understand in the political eye, you might be fearful of making a decision and
I could understand
maybe
that having been in that position.
yes.
However, if you come from any one of those states where the voters have already said yes, because remember, I think there's only 2 or 3 of the 40 states that it was done by the legislature. All the rest of them, it was the voters.
Right.
Through a referendum said, we want this. What are you afraid of?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense to me.
Right. Well, that's true. Sure. If the public in your state is telling you that this is what they want, then right. Why it might be a personal conviction, a personal belief rather than a political issue for some. But the federal government at some point must have to get involved, don't you think? I mean, where do you see this going?
This president is, he's been opposed. Obama was opposed to it. Donald Trump could have rescheduled marijuana. He didn't do it. Biden has not done anything about it. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe Trump too, if he wins, or Biden too, will change their mind. It doesn't make, I don't know.
Well, I'm thinking that we have so many issues that they have to address that this is probably just another one that's on the list for them.
They should be able to walk and chew gum at the same time.
True. I guess that's when you get into that job, that's the description of the job. That's why not all of us do that job, because it is difficult. Yeah. But I just think that even to purchase online, I'm assuming that you can't even do that. Like you just don't know. Your hands are tied because you just don't know what to do.
Right. You're legally not allowed to. But I would bet if you went online, because nobody polices the internet. I mean, that is an example where there are no borders. I mean, there's pretty much not anything you couldn't buy online if you tried.
Right. And I'm assuming that's a whole other can of worms, right? I mean, then you need all kinds of employees to be doing that type of job too, policing the internet to see how many people are attempting to buy it from one state to another. I mean, here I've heard of many people, they just drive not that far away to either New Jersey or Massachusetts. Before New York had adopted its own laws, people were already going to the other states.
Right. Technically,
I know you're not supposed to, but
no, you can. So if you're an adult, each state sets it at age 21. You can go to Massachusetts. If you're a New York State resident and you want to go to Massachusetts and buy legal marijuana, you can do that.
Right.
You're not supposed to bring it home with you.
Right. You're not supposed to cross over into, or at that time you weren't supposed to cross.
Right. But are we going to put a state trooper at every border crossing?
I know. How could you do that? Right.
And the same thing for New York.
I would just think that may make people on the roadways a little bit unsafe. Right. I mean, if you had to go to another state to purchase this product and you can't get it in your state that you could bring home to your house, you're driving from another state. That's, unless you're hoping to get home and not get caught. But think about it. If you're using it in that state and driving home afterwards, how safe really is that?
Well, it's similar to people who go to, they cross the border and you go to Jersey. I live in Staten Island. People go to Jersey. They have dinner in New Jersey. They have a couple of drinks and they drive back home. So this was a major bone of contention during the negotiations around the legalization for adult use in New York. Among a lot of the law and order types, it's like, well, what would do? People will be driving. I said, well, they're driving now, right? They're driving now, smoking weed. Yeah, illegally or not. I said they're doing it now. The difference between alcohol and marijuana is you can do a what they call the blood alcohol test. You can do the breathalyzer, and a person's blood alcohol level immediately, right? So for law enforcement, it's simple. Why is someone pulled over? If you're a cop and you pull someone over, you pull them over because they have violated the vehicle and traffic law one way.
Hope.
Right?
We hope. I have my own opinions, but we hope.
They're speeding. There's broken tail
driving
light,
erratically,
driving erratically. Right. You pull them over. If you pull them over and you walk up to the car and you smell alcohol, you can ask them to step out of the car and take a breathalyzer test. They can refuse.
Yeah.
You have the right in New York State to refuse that test.
I know.
If you do so, you will be arrested on the spot.
Yes. Yeah.
The license will be suspended. You will be taken to the precinct. Now, you may be ordered to take a breathalyzer the next day, but by then your blood alcohol level may have dissipated. But that's the penalty for refusal to take a breathalyzer if they smell alcohol. The problem with cannabis is there is no test to determine whether or not you are ability impaired because of cannabis. So if I do a test on you, I take a hair sample, they take a blood sample, you may find cannabis in your system, but there's no way to determine when you used it. Could have been a month ago, could have been yesterday, could have been half an hour ago. That test has not yet been perfected. There's a couple of companies that are working on it. There's some promising research, but it's not there yet. So for a cop who pulls you over and they detect the smell of marijuana, which under New York State law now doesn't even allow a cop to search your car.
Oh, okay.
Right. But I smell marijuana. You're driving erratically. What do? Can you pass a field sobriety test? Get out of the car. Can you walk the 10 feet, touch those things? And if you can't do that, then you are driving while ability impaired. And I can issue you a ticket, maybe arrest you, take you to the precinct. But I can't charge you with being under the influence of cannabis because I don't know. Even if we did the hair test, it's just very subjective. Right. And until we have research and a test that's infallible, that's going to continue to be a problem. But by the way, that was a problem before the law was passed.
Right.
In every state. There's never been a test for cannabis. Alcohol is the alcohol you can determine because we have the testing and the blood alcohol level is easily evaluated. And 08 is 08, whether you are 6'3", 5'3", 400 pounds or 60 pounds. 08 is the legal limit for alcohol. Everyone's drunk at 08.
Yes. Yeah. Well, hopefully they will find something because driving while impaired, no matter what you're impaired with, is a different issue, right? I mean, that's something that you're also running the risk of damaging, killing other people, innocent people.
We don't want
that's
people.
A whole other
That's another reason why I was very concerned about one of the issues that was another bone of contention, which made it into the law, and I was very opposed to it, was allowing what they call local opt-out. So there was, in order to get some of the legislators to agree to support this law, they were only willing to vote for it if it allowed their counties or towns
Oh,
to
yes.
opt out of having, any part of the industry in their town. So at one point, I think all of Nassau and Suffolk were opting out. I think Dutchess was opting out. I'm not sure where they all are now, but what then happens is it forces people. So you live in Queens. Queens is, New York City is not opting out because, they want to have a
Right.
legal market. You live in Suffolk or Nassau County. Where are you going to go? You're going to
Queens,
drive
you're
to
driving
Queens.
in, yeah, of course.
And now you're going to drive home. So all of the people who were concerned about having the legal market in their county are now wondering, well, oh my God, people are driving to Queens, buying the stuff, and now they're driving home. So you have to think these things through. Saying no to the legal marketplace doesn't prevent the illegal marketplace, and it doesn't prevent people going to the legal marketplace and driving home through
Right.
your dry county. So it's complicated, and it's forced people to really think about what they were raised to view medical, cannabis about. We went through this with the medical program first, trying to re-socialize the way people think about, drugs in general. And I've always said, the way Americans approach drugs is, if you're we now know that addiction is an illness, it's a
Of course. Yes.
biopsychosocial disease that, people don't choose to become addicts. It's not a character
No,
defect.
that's right. That's right.
And nobody would choose that.
And anybody
Right.
can have this
Anybody, right.
illness.
Right. And no one would choose this.
Of course not,
They
right?
avoid
Right.
it. It's not something they want. But we accept that now. We understand that. And it's a terrible disease that take good people to bad
You
places.
better
But
believe it.
if you are lucky, if you're a lucky addict, you are addicted to a legal substance. Right? So
Right.
people they feel bad for you, but they don't have open scorn for you, right? So if you're lucky, you're addicted to a legal substance, we save a chair for you in a church basement. Right? You go to meetings.
Sad, but true.
If you are unlucky and you're addicted to an illegal substance, we save a jail cell for you. It's the same disease. The only thing that's different is your drug of choice.
That's right.
If you're an alcoholic, you walk into a liquor store and you can go home and sit there and people say, oh, it's really sad. What a shame. What happened to her? But if, you find yourself addicted to opioids and now you're cut off by your doctor, you have only one place to go. That's the illegal marketplace.
Which is a terrible situation because I think that even the doctors at first didn't even know. And so everybody was getting them and then they could no longer get them. And now you have this big problem.
And then where do you go? You go to the street. You either buy, pills, you don't know where they're coming from, or you turn to heroin. And so this is what this disjointed policy that we have in this country is. It's awful.
And it is, it's a terrible situation. And add that to all the other problems that the country may have. That's
indeed.
it's a pretty big things to try to solve, try to help, try to work out. I mean, I can't see how this is going to change quickly.
No, but state by state, at some point, voters will force their legislators to do the right thing.
Let's hope so. Because after all, it is. I mean, well, after all, it is the people. There is power. Let's face it, there is power with the people. People have to speak.
They do. They do indeed.
I know that it's difficult because I know that we had personally where we had gotten some information from people, I guess, that were running for office and they wanted to have something local and it was very difficult for them to pass. So, it does, they do meet with opposition and for whatever reason, whatever the belief system is. But like you said, that there are definitely places that are illegal and that causes more problems.
Well, I mean, that's, they say the beauty and the curse of, a great democracy is, we're like New York State's 19 million people with 38 million opinions, right? Everybody and everybody's entitled to express it. But, that's how, the world changes, one opinion at a time. And sometimes, it can take a small group of people to really effectuate change, and I'll go back to where I started this. When I got involved in this issue, everyone kind of thought they knew. They had solid opinions one way or the other on whether the state should do this. But I had a lot of opposition from, as you can imagine, the older guard who just couldn't wrap their head
Yes.
around the idea of allowing people to use cannabis and I had people come up that, lobby them. They were people who had cancer, some people who had MS, some people, they didn't move them. What moved them was a group of parents, mothers who had children who suffered from what's called Dravet syndrome, which is a refractory epilepsy. Most of these kids were wheelchair bound. They had very restricted lives because they would suffer from chronic seizures, sometimes 100 a day. And they would wheel their kids around the Capitol 2-3 times a week. And some of this, the senators and assembly members who would see them coming, they would try and hide because they didn't want to face this. They didn't want to have these conversations. But these mothers did not give up.
Yeah.
And we held a hearing in the Senate hearing room. And, there were 3 or 4 members sitting alongside me. 2 of them were vehemently opposed to it. And after watching this panel with these, these was 5 women and their kids, at the end, he said, "You know what? I don't know if this stuff works." He says, "But if it helps those kids, I'm going to vote for it." And sometimes that's what happens. It can be just that compelling human story that moves legislators to go beyond what they're willing to do, what they're comfortable with, because they see the limitations in the law and they want to fix things. And ultimately, that's what you're supposed to do in government. Find ways to stretch the limitations of law to help people.
Right, exactly.
And hopefully this did for some people.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on. I mean, this topic is a large one, and it you can go on and on, really, all different areas of this. But I want to thank you, as I know you're very busy, and for you to come on and speak to the audience like this.
I was happy
it was
to come.
So worth it. Thank you. Have a
Thank
wonderful afternoon.
You too. Good to see
Bye.
you, Marisa.
Yes,
All right,
nice
bye.
to see you. Bye now.